Yeah, more towards Whale, just so that we can flush out any trigger men that'll look at the working calls on the track.
At the moment, we can promise things, but they're not going to trust us completely. And to be honest, they probably shouldn't. But once we build the patrol base and we have that permanent presence, it'll be a lot easier for us to give them things, and they'll know that we're not going to leave them the following day for the Taliban to come in and destroy everything.
I remember being in Afghanistan and talking to one of the commanders who'd been a police officer working on the Melbourne gangland stuff, Piranha Task Force, and he said to me that he thought Melbourne was more dangerous than Afghanistan. I don't think he was completely joking either. And I certainly think that, I've said a couple of times that, you know, I've sheltered from snipers and artillery fire. You know, I've you know, sheltered behind piles of dead bodies, you know, in war zones. And I'd do that again tomorrow ahead of being cross-examined for 3 days by a cold-blooded QC. You know, the hardest work to do is in Australia. And when you're working abroad, of course, the stories are well known over there, but they're not so well known over here. So the cost of labour of the journalism isn't so great. I don't know why, but I never found that the physical danger was nearly as intimidating to me as the psychological danger.
Hey, Butts, you can move up on the road with your two, hey?
Yeah, mate, I'm already there.
Tonight, a comprehensive measure from the ground level in the Mirabad Valley, Afghanistan, of pain and gain in this war of inches.
Don't get too comfortable because we're stepping up here.
Yeah, right, mate.
I found that it could be exhilarating working. And you think about bravery, you know, I don't think of myself as being a particularly brave person, but I probably do have a certain amount of, I think you have to have a certain amount of moral courage to stand up to the assault of the courts and, you know, a range of powerful people who clearly abuse their power. But I thought there were lots of rules that you develop when you're working abroad in war zones as well, that it shouldn't be about you, you know, it should be about the story. And the story was telling people what was actually happening. So that didn't mean self-regard, that didn't mean sort of ducking for cover as the bullets whizzed past and doing a breathless piece to camera. I found that, interestingly, when I was working in Queensland on the police corruption stuff, I worked outside the tent. You know, you had to work outside the tent. It didn't make sense to work inside the tent. As soon as you came close to these corrupt police officers, they would manipulate the process. They would cover up. When I was working in Afghanistan, I could also work outside the tent, you know, and in some respects, a lot of journalists would favour that. They would think that the guerrilla journalists, you know, working beyond the perimeter of the ADF media organisations would get a purer truth. But, you know, if you did manage to get an interview with a Taliban commander and not get your throat cut and not force some special forces team to come and rescue you, how would you know that you were getting closer to the truth anyway, you know?
Engineers go forward and within minutes there's a find.
Discovered a IED.
Yeah, there's a possible IED just down at Overwatch Position 1, which is Victor 1-3 call sign down the left-hand side. Atmospheric suggests that locals have just buggered off out of there.
150 metres to the west.
So what we're looking for is people with antennas or binoculars or showing particular interest in the location of where the possible IED has been found.
The sappers identify and choose to detonate the mine.
journalism is about good judgment, and you had to accept the fact that you sourced information from a range of different places. When I was in Afghanistan, I knew that if I turned up in a village and I asked the villagers what they thought about the Taliban, and I had 6 beefy Australian soldiers with all their body armour and their weapons standing around me, you know, they were hardly going to open up. So, you know, we found a team to work outside that perimeter to gather as much information as they can. But for the defence stories, I tended to work much more inside the tent and trust my own judgment as to whether, you know, I was being manipulated or whether or not I could work it out for myself. And I had to be fair and reasonable about it. I didn't think that the people that I was working with in defence were operating in bad faith, were determined to tell me lies. I didn't think that at all. I just had to work it out for myself.
The journey takes Alpha Company to its most dismal day, the day luck runs out, when sappers Moreland and Smith are killed.
The day before, we were having a conversation of how much he loved his job, how much he loved being here.
I'll pick you up on the other side.
On the following morning, the patrols go out again.
Yep, no worries.
The danger has far from passed. From the main base at Tarancot, a UAV, or unmanned aerial vehicle, is launched to cast a sharper eye.
Just looking at threat assessment coming from Sawclares of 107mm rockets or RPG attack on the Shura. They're looking at trying to disrupt this activities.
Helicopters provide a further deterrent to the potential rocket strike. By mid-morning, Afghan National Army, Dutch and Australian forces are gathered.
I guess the question around embedding, as they call it, is, you know, will they just show you things they want to show you and then not show you things they don't want to show you?
Probably, but you know that, so you do your best. And in fact, when I was there in 2010, there wasn't much that they could possibly hide from me. And my job was to show the Australian public what was going on. And I did come to a view that, that there was nothing wrong with working inside the tent, as long as my own checks and balances continually applied. And indeed, I absolutely say with confidence that if I'd have worked outside the tent completely, I'm sure I wouldn't have done as good a job.
Would you have been able to do it at all? I mean, in terms
Probably
of
not, you know, and I probably wouldn't have come back. You know, civilians, civilian aid workers and journalists were in some respects bigger targets than soldiers because there was more ink associated with them. And that itself is irresponsible of me to go wandering off through the hills of Afghanistan, be captured and held hostage by the Taliban and potentially have my throat cut with a rusty knife and force other Australians to potentially try to come to my rescue.
you need to be alive to tell the story.
You do, and the same dynamic working in, say, Indonesia, you know, where if you report on corruption, you'll get deported. So do you turn a blind eye to certain things because you can't do your job if you're deported? So you do your best to find a way. If you're being forced into a position that you don't agree with, you know, you absolutely pull up stumps. But there is a certain amount of room for cat and mouse, I think, you know, when we're dealing with people who are never going to tell you the truth. You know, how do you get to the truth? I don't think you get to the truth by telling lies, but you mightn't tell all the truth yourself.
Yeah, Jen, take a fire team up to the top of this large quail.
It is another day of fatigue and frustration. On the way back, farmers become agitated.
So what do they get cross about?
Well, the locals here, it's an eternal issue, I guess, of walking through the fields. So if you don't walk through the fields and you walk on the footpads, the insurgents put IEDs in the footpads, Therefore, the women and kids are at risk of being blown up when we walk through them. So we choose to walk through the fields on occasions. The risk is that you damage the crops, but the IEDs are placed in the fields, not on the footpads.
In July, in the Mirrabad, temperatures rise above 50 degrees. This has been a shorter 9 kilometres patrol.
Bloody hot. It's like about 49 degrees, so yeah, not good.
Off camera, one of the heavily laden soldiers, reluctant to ask for help, pitches over as soon as he's through the wire.
You really are scared by the unknown. You like to think that the truth will out no matter what, but you tend to be a little bit suspicious about that. And I wonder, for example, if those two people in New Zealand had not made a note of the number plate of the van that was being used by the French Secret Service, and on two separate occasions, would we have known what happened in New Zealand? Would we have ever been able to chase that down? Would we have ever been able to prove that the French Secret Service was behind that bombing? So that does scare me. You know, how many other times has that occurred? And
near misses.
They've got away with it, yeah.
A lot of people seem to think that, you know, television journalism, news journalism, that, you know, it involves aggression, barking questions at someone, but certainly not in investigative, and wouldn't be your style either.
No, not the style of a great many investigative reporters. I saw a lot of female reporters do extremely well, and there's nothing like plain and simple curiosity. You know, tell me your story, and if you're really genuinely interested and you're not promoting yourself, people would inch closer. And I think that a lot of the journalism that is observed is the 7:30 report type barking at the Prime Minister or the Defence Minister or whomever, because that's a bit of a contest. It's a bit of theatre, and it's understandable, you know, that the politician wants to promote their message. You know, they don't like you very much. They're just stuck with having to deal with you because they want to get through to the public beyond the camera. And you know, there are some tricks in trying to unsettle people, and after a while you realise that it can seem like a silly game. You don't really expect people to suddenly confess because there's a camera rolling.
No.
It almost never happened. It did happen actually on a couple of occasions, but almost never happened. What you really needed was that document. You know, if you were trying to force a truth to be revealed, then, and they were saying no, it didn't happen, then you could, well, how do you explain this?
So when you're interviewing someone, did you feel that you already had a good idea of what the answer would be and whether it was the truth or not, because of the research that you'd done?
Yeah, well, the kind of work that I did meant that when I was interviewing them on camera, it was probably not the first time I'd interviewed them. It was probably the 10th time, maybe the 20th time. And by the way, most interviews you do are not adversarial. Mostly what you're looking for is plain and simple honesty. Mostly what you're looking for is that unguarded moment when people just give of themselves. It mightn't be about a particularly contentious subject. Some of my favourite interviews were with just ordinary people. You know, they weren't celebrities, they weren't trained interviewees. And the great gift to the public and to the reporter is when they become unconscious of the camera and the lights around them, and they just reveal something special.